Welcome to another episode of the Antifragility Reframe podcast, where struggles become strength and stress fuels growth. As you know, we're doing a series called Alumni Stories in Reframing and Antifragility, and we've been focusing on alumni from Lehigh University. Our alumna today is Ms. Iman Mosley. She is an MD PhD student at Duke University, just started the first year of the PhD part of her journey, and she is a graduate of Lehigh of the class of 2020. Ms. Mosley, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so happy to see you. I remember my days in medical school,
Mhm.
and medical school is quite different. It's particularly the first 2 years.
Hmm.
I think the fun part is when you're on the clinics, and if you're doing an MD, PhD, the fun part is the PhD part. Uh,
Yes.
that is the fun part. So
Yeah.
tell me, as you think about your time as an undergraduate at Lehigh, could you think of a time that was very stressful, very challenging for you?
Yes. So when I was at Lehigh, I was in the rare program. Um, and the great thing about the rare program is it gave me a lot of research exposure early on. So more than most undergrads would, I would say. And Dr. Ware and Dr. Simon were always so supportive of me and kind to me. And they told me, I'd be a wonderful candidate, whether I applied to MD programs or PhD programs or both. And I'm not going to lie, I loved the external validation, and I never really thought beyond that. I was just like, okay, like they think that I'm good to go and I'm ready for it. And when I was a junior, I sat down and I met with Lehigh's pre-med advisor at the time. And she asked me such a simple question, which was, why do you want to be a doctor? And for some reason, I never thought of that. I never rehearsed it, and I never really thought deeply about it. I think probably because I was kind of like in a weird survival mode. As you know, Lehigh is very academically rigorous and the classes are very challenging. And so I think I was just trying so hard to stay on top of my coursework, and I never thought about that question. And honestly, I didn't have a good answer. And I was just sitting there. I didn't have anything to say, and she pushed further. And she asked me, if you love research so much, because I told her about all of my research experience. And she asked, if you love research so much, why not just do a PhD? And I never really separated those things in my head before. I don't know. I didn't have a good answer for it. And I felt like suddenly the path that I'd been so sure of and I'd been so confidently walking towards, it felt, I don't know, I felt really disoriented after that.
So how did you deal with that? It made you feel disoriented. You began to doubt yourself, I imagine. How did you deal with it? And was there anyone who helped you through that?
Yeah, I think at first it felt like some sort of crisis. Sometimes I can be a little bit dramatic, but once I calmed down and I spoke to Dr. Ware and Dr. Simon about things, which was super helpful, um, I, yeah, that grounded me a lot. But I will say, like, my confidence took a big hit, and I felt like I think for the first time I was sort of like, where do I even start, kind of? Um, and I guess what I did to kind of reorient myself was sit down and ask myself, like, why am I actually doing this? And I tried to be more intentional, I guess. And I think what also helped is, so as you know, Lehigh doesn't have a medical school. It has a lot of wonderful things. But I started being creative about, different ways that I could get clinical exposure. And through that process, that really helped me understand, like, why am I doing this? I'm not just doing it for the external validation, which might have fueled me before, but I started really asking myself, why am I doing this? What does this career path look like? And as I started to get more exposure to the clinical side of things, I realized something, which was that what I loved so much about research was that it gave me the tools to help people sort of like long term. And I thought it was so cool to be able to help, people who didn't have a treatment option or had, poor treatment options, that sort of thing. But I think what hit me once I got more clinical exposure was that, research has a timeline and it takes more time. And once I started doing more clinical things, I realized I want to be able to help people now. I felt that urgency. And I realized that medicine would be able to do that for me. And I realized that the PhD would also allow me to, help people long term by thinking of novel ways to solve problems in medicine. Um, and I've just figured that the MD PhD would allow me to do both.
So tell me, did this I will call it a mini crisis that you had,
Mhm.
did that cause you to change perspective, to look at things differently?
Yes, for sure. Because I I think after kind of like feeling sorry for myself for a little bit, and having those grounding conversations with Dr. Ware and Dr. Simon, and doing a lot of crying, I had to understand like I need to take a step forward in some direction. And so I would say that that really pushed me to think more critically and be more intentional about what I'm doing. Um,
So two things I hear.
mhm,
One, the challenge that you got from the pre-med advisor, I guess it was,
mhm,
who asked the critical question, why do you want to be a clinical doctor?
mhm.
Okay, and not just a research doctor.
Yeah.
Why do you want to do that?
Mhm,
So you had the challenge of that question, which, as a matter of fact, caused you to really think deeply. And in fact, it brought you to the point where you actually questioned, why are you doing this?
mhm.
And then you had mentors,
Yes.
Professor Ware and Professor Simon, who were the co-directors of RARE
Mhm.
at the time. And so they were mentors, and you
Yeah.
were able to reach out to them
Yes.
and to have the discussion.
Mhm,
And then you had another thing, namely, you did something positive. You sought experience
mhm,
to understand what it would be like to be in a clinical type setting.
mhm,
And so you went forward to do that. And when we think about being faced with stress, you can bounce back from it. And we call that, being resilient.
mhm,
But we like to think that when we have stress, that we deal with it in such a way that it makes us stronger. And I say we bounce forward,
mhm.
and that is being anti-fragile. So it sounds to me that in this episode that you had, you actually attained anti-fragility.
I think what I've learned can be beneficial to others. I think a lot about pre-med students who are high achievers and get a lot of sort of external affirmation, things like you'd be great at this, without ever really being pushed to ask why. I think most students who are planning to go into medical school or get a PhD or, know that they have some sort of important interview question, like that, kind of looming over them, I think they kind of think in pat or, they think a little bit about like, why do I want to do this? But I think sometimes people don't really understand to a point to where they can articulate it well. And so I really try to pass it forward by talking to younger students and getting them to think critically about why they want to do what they're doing. Um, and it's not to rattle them or anything like that, but because I think that knowing that answer is very protective and helps a lot with confidence. And it's ultimately what keeps you going when things get hard. Um,
So
and
knowing what is it you want and why you're doing things are
Mhm,
critical to help you keep going
mhm,
when things get tough.
I think so.
So as they say, when things get rough, the tough get going.
Mhm.
So that's one way to help you be tough and keep going. So this experience that you had, how has that or has it helped you with any challenges that you've had in medical school?
Yeah, I think medical school is definitely hard. The PhD, I'm only a year into it, but it's really hard. And I think particularly pursuing both degrees. Um, it's kind of like a balancing act. Like when I'm focused so much on research, I kind of need to ground myself and remind myself why I'm doing the research, similarly to when I was in undergrad. And because I had that experience, I'm able to do that. I think, it's really easy to sort of develop or excuse me, to develop a tunnel vision and kind of lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing. And so I would say like that episode that I went through in undergrad ultimately helped me to keep pushing forward, and remembering why I'm doing what I'm doing.
So in terms of growth, we talk about having a growth outcome mindset. How do you think you have grown?
Um, I mean, I think I have grown to that experience that I had while I was at Lehigh has sort of helped me develop a framework for how I approach problems. Um, and I think it has positioned me to no longer kind of resort to crisis mode when something happens that, I'm not expecting, and to sort of just take things one step at a time.
What's one thing that you would uh, advise undergraduates, given your experience? What's one bit of wisdom that you would leave with them?
I think to just always ask yourself why you're doing something or why you're interested in something, um, and not to do things just to sort of check boxes, but to pursue what you're genuinely interested in. And if you don't know the answer to that question, if you don't know why you're doing something, then to seek out mentorship and to talk to people and have conversations and gain exposure so that you can have a better idea. Because I think all humans, like we wonder what our purpose is and what we're supposed to do here on Earth. And I think that by, getting that exposure, thinking critically, those are things that can sort of help you answer that question. I still don't completely know, like, what my purpose is, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But I think grounding myself by asking why and asking others who, you know, have done it before me is a really good starting point. So,
Miss Mosley, thank you very much for sharing with us the challenge you had at Lehigh, how you handled it, and how that is helping you as you continue your journey in the MD PhD program at Duke. And I'm sure that our audience will remember
thank
knowing the why, what is our purpose, and reaching out to others to help us understand the why.